Welcome back to V.O.C YouTube channel. We are down to the Final Four when it comes to college football. It's crazy to think that you start the season months ago with over 130 teams liable to win a national title. Then you go to this 12-team playoff. Now we're down to 4. It all comes down to this. 2 games this week. Let's jump into it.
Third down
When you look at it, and it is crazy to think, in September, late August, early September, we were like, all right, 130-some teams. Not everybody has a shot to win, right? But you have, I would say, probably 40 teams nowadays with the 12-team playoff that think that they can make it into the playoff. And then you dwindle it down to 12. You have the debate on who should be in, who shouldn't be in. The games told us who should have been and who shouldn't have been in. In my opinion, the games always prove and always show. So all the talk of SEC and it gets played out. Every year is going to be different. The problem is we are so used to a dominant SEC, especially in my lifetime, of how they went on a run from, I think it was 06 to 14 where they won every national title, and then they went on another little mini run individually through there after the next couple of years. So it's one of those things we're so used to the dominance of one conference, and it's kind of changed with NIL and transfer portal, and it's leveled out the playing field. This is what they wanted in college football, NCAA, and it's worked out well. So the people that are hating on it and going crazy for it just need to stop. And I think the biggest thing is the main deterrent and the factor of, and they ended up looking like clowns this past weekend and the weekend before, was, ESPN looked like clowns, but you have to remember ESPN is in bed with the SEC, so they have to defend that wall, even if it's going to make them look a little silly. So just remember that when you're watching these games, and now there's no SEC team involved other than Texas, but they're not a true blue blood SEC, only being in it for not even a year yet. So you have to think about that when you're watching these games. You have 2 Big Ten teams, an independent team, basically 3 Midwestern teams and a Southern team. So, the people are up in arms about it, but you have to remember at the end of the day, the games will show itself out, and that's what happened. Looking back on last week's games, or 10 days or so ago, Texas beat Arizona State, 39-31 in overtime. This is what Texas has been all year. Against the very average or below teams, they dominate. They are Texas. They come out, they play. Teams that are mediocre to good, they kind of let them play for a little bit, and then they kind of pull away. When they play good teams, they struggle. I think the big factor was for Arizona State was that bye. All 4 teams that had byes lost. That became a big factor, big deterrent. I think it took Arizona State a while to move up and to get going towards the end of that game. Texas had just jumped out to a big enough lead that it saved them. People want to talk about the targeting call. I didn't think it was targeting in the moment. To me, it was that. It wasn't that. Targeting is this, not this. So people want to talk about it. You can argue that call or whatever. Like I said, to me, it wasn't targeting. But you gave up a touchdown on 4th and 13. You can't have that in overtime. So you have those lapses. But Arizona State looked very well. They defended themselves very well in that second half. The first half, I'm like, this is what I thought. I thought Texas was going to blow them out. It's going that way, but they fought. They fought to the end. I give them a lot of credit. Cam Skattebo throwing up on the sideline. He came out of that game with more love for Arizona State and Cam Skattebo than anything else. Penn State the night before beating Boise, not shocked by that. I thought that would happen. Just Penn State's path has been very easy, but Penn State's starting to play their best football towards the end. They played Oregon very, very well in that Big Ten championship game. We can say what we want about Oregon now playing Ohio State, but any team that's kind of playing Ohio State up to this point, I think that would have happened to. But they're starting to play some really good football. SMU, argue if they make it in the playoff or not, but Penn State's defense looked very good in that game. Boise State, they held Genty, kept them in check. Another good defensive game. Their offense is kind of starting to expand a little bit. So, yeah, their path has been easy, but they're starting to play their best football towards the end, and that could be a very, very dangerous team. Like I said, Ohio State beat Oregon. It wasn't even close from the start. It ended up being 41-21. look, they've been pissed off since the Michigan game. Michigan woke them up. It's crazy to think that it took them to playing Michigan to wake them up. But I also think the problem with Ohio State playing Michigan is it's a mental thing with a Ryan Day team at this point. Michigan could have the far less team, which we saw this year, but mentally they're not there when they play them. Michigan has that upper advantage. Ohio State can play anybody else, and they can dominate them. We proved that with the Tennessee game and the Oregon game, but they're also so it was a mixture of when they play Michigan they struggle, but they lost, now they're pissed off. So you mixture that. If they played Michigan right now, I think they would struggle again. It's just the mindset when they play them. So right now, you can see from the Todd's video, can anybody beat them at this point? And right now it's very tough to say that the way they're playing, the way they're using Jeremiah Smith. Will Howard's playing good. If you do end up trying to shut down Jeremiah Smith, well, you have Mbuka, you have Carnell Tate. I mean, the running game, Henderson had a long run. And it's not that they have to run the ball because they don't necessarily win these games. They haven't had to really. They have the most talent when it comes to a football team, right? They went out and they spent the money, $20 million, to retain talent, bring in talent, and it's showing. So they're starting to play just like Penn State, very good towards the end. Notre Dame beat Georgia 23-10. Look, it's a big program win, but the moving forward factor, moving forward now with Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame is you haven't won a game like that since Lou Holtz, since I think 93, 96 or whatever it was. So you haven't won that type of game. So how do you now come in the next game? Are you still hungry for more? As a Notre Dame fan, I've never seen a win like that. It was the biggest win of my lifetime. To win a New Year's Six Bowl like that massive, against a program like Georgia who has been very dominant over the past 5 to 10 years with Kirby leading them. So it's very interesting now that we won that type of game. How do we come out and play? I believe that Marcus will come out and will play very good. I'm going to get into both games Thursday and Friday coming up, but I think that's going to be the biggest test is now that we won that game, are you going to be shocked to be like, oh, we won that, moving forward now, I don't think that's going to be the case, but that's going to be the biggest question is that has not happened in a very, very long time, a win like that against a program like that where they looked like that. So moving forward, what happens? A shorter week than Penn State, how do you build from it? But all in all, look, I think the game's stuff all over this, it's bothering me all over. Looking at these games, look, Arizona State, it looked like a blowout. They came back and they won. Boise, Penn State looked about like what we thought. Ohio State, Oregon was supposed to be the best game. It turned out not to be the best game, right? Oregon got dominated left and right. Notre Dame controlling Georgia for the most part. Now, I was very nervous during that game. Heart was coming out of my chest as a fan. But they made the biggest plays in the biggest moments, and it also felt like everything went Notre Dame's way for the first time, like I said, in my lifetime, where we got all the breaks. So, who would have thought that Texas-Arizona State would end up being the best game with how it started? So moving on to this week's games, look, I was 3-1 last week. I picked Texas to win, but I also picked Texas to cover against Arizona State, and I do not believe that they did. I think the spread was, 13. They did not cover that. So they ended up winning by 8. So the first game Thursday, the Orange Bowl, number 7 Notre Dame, 13-1, minus 1.5 point favorite versus number 6 Penn State, 13-2. This game's interesting because if Georgia would have beat Notre Dame, Penn State would have been favored. So that's kind of how they view Georgia, is not as good as Penn State, but not as good as Notre Dame, but Penn State not as good as Notre Dame. So, look, I think this game's going to be tight. I think it's going to be low scoring. I think it's going to be defensive-oriented, just like the other couple games that Notre Dame has played. It's going to come down to how does Notre Dame limit the Penn State offense in their trickery, how they move the tight end Tyler Warren around. They like to make their matchups easier for themselves with how they do things, where they line guys up, how they move around. And they have 2 very good backs. It's going to be a defensive game. I expect it to be low scoring. I expect it to be close. I think Notre Dame wins a close one here. And I just think we have the momentum going forward. Jeremiah Love's going to play. I think Riley Leonard can make enough plays like he did in Georgia to move them along. So I think it's a close one, but I think Penn State kind of fits the mold of Notre Dame wants to play. and I think it's going to work out. I am nervous about the shorter week for Notre Dame, but I just think ultimately Notre Dame can control the game and make those plays when it needs to be made. So I think Notre Dame's going to win a close one. Ultimately, I think who wins this game is going to have a very tough test in the next round. But I think Notre Dame wins a close one based off of how they played against Georgia, the Marcus Freeman's ability to get a team ready to play. I still do not trust James Franklin. He's had an easier path than most when it comes to this playoff. His track record in big games is not consistently good in the back. So taking that into consideration, I think Notre Dame wins a very close one, but I think this is a very good game, low scoring. It could be whoever scores 20, hell, who may even score 17. Higher scoring it goes, better off for Penn State. All right, now the Cotton Bowl Friday night, basically a de facto Ohio State home game, or Texas home game in Dallas, not very far for Texas to travel to. It is number 8 Ohio State, 12-2, minus 5.5 point favorite, versus number 5 Texas. Texas is 13-2. Looking at this game, we build Ohio State, anybody beat them. They're kind of dominant right now. Should we just give them the national title the way they're playing? What helps Texas in this game is two things. They had a close game last week. That helps them because it's like, we almost lost to Arizona State. We need to pick it up. 2, they have a very good defense. Their defense is very good. When they played Georgia, other than the first time, which they played on some short fields, their defense is very, very good. It's limited some teams. So I think that will help them at a start. I just think Ohio State's playing the best football you can play for a team right now. I don't think they're worried about walking into Dallas where there's going to be a bunch of Texas fans. They're not worried about that. I think that they are on a war path. They're on a revenge path. They are willing and ready to move forward and to win a national title and to prove we didn't have to beat Michigan to win a national title. Now, a 12-team playoff helps that, but that's just where I think they're at. So the 5.5, I think Ohio State covers that. I think it's close in the first half. Ohio State slowly pulls away. I think they get their playmakers in the groove, and I just don't think Texas's offense consistently can do enough against that Ohio State defense to win the game. Now, I think Texas is going to be able to take some advantages early, throwing the ball deep against Ohio State. If you're going to beat Ohio State, that's kind of how you do it. You need to attack their corners. But I don't think consistently they're going to be able to do that with Quinn Ewers. The way he's kind of playing up and down and in the rhythm, the overtime helps him from last week. But I think it's close, and I think Ohio State pulls away. They get their playmakers involved. Their defense starts to bring some pressure against that offensive line, who is supposed to be a very good offensive line, but it feels like every time I watch them, they're very vulnerable. They also have some injuries, so it's going to be interesting to see. But I think, moving forward, we're set up for Notre Dame-Ohio State national title. I will go more in depth to the national title last week when it's officially set. But I think that's what's going to happen. I think Notre Dame is going to beat Penn State, close field goal game. And then I think Ohio State pulls away and probably ends up winning by a touchdown to 10 points against Texas. That's just kind of what I'm feeling. I think it's close in the first half, and Ohio State pulls away in the second. I don't think they're worried about the things. They are focused, they have their blinders on, and they're ready to go. That's going to do it for this week's video. Thanks for watching.